Hi, everybody. All right, today we're going to talk about the Middle Kingdom, which was from about 2055 to 1650 BCE. All right, so your job, as it always will be and probably won't change, is to watch this Ed puzzle. Make sure you watch it all the way through. Any questions I ask will be in blue text, and the important concepts will be in red text, so follow along with your study guide. And if you have questions, you can email me or you can come to office hours. Fun. Learning target, as it has been for the last two videos, is describe the development characteristics and decline of civilizations in Egypt. All right, so pharaohs, we talked about them the other time. They have an obligation to conquer new land. So remember 2 videos ago, I talked about Mot. Um, yeah, so this is kind of like the pharaohs, like Mot told me that I need to go conquer this new land. And that's what they would do. But where would they get this land? Yes, that answer to that is Nubia. And here's a beautiful statue of Senusret the Third. All right, so annexation of northern Nubia. There we go. So last video, what did I say about Nubia and its major region of Yam? Or Yam, if you want to talk about the food. Yeah, so I talked about how Nubia was in the land south of Egypt. Okay, so it's still on the Nile. It'd be considered what present day Sudan would be. Um, and then also Yam was a major region in Nubia with desirable goods such as gold, ivory, and some of those like smelly perfume things that we talked about. Here's a picture of a modern day or a modern day picture of a city located within Yam. All right, so here is kind of a map. Um, not really a time period map, it's just a good map that shows you all the little places where Nubia did have land. So Nubia would be in that like kind of pinkish area right here. And also make sure that you see, it'd be important to point out that the second cataract, which we're going to talk about what a cataract is, by the way, is right here. All right, so don't Google this, okay? I want to see what your answers are. What does annexation mean? All right, so annexation occurs throughout history. But what it is when a country, such as Egypt, takes over another country's territory using its military. It could be its whole territory, or it could just be like a little part of it. Um, there doesn't necessarily have to be like a war or battle involved in one country annexing another country's land. Sometimes countries' armies could just like walk right in, and the other country would be like, "Oh snap, these guys look pretty powerful. I'm not gonna mess with them. They can have the land." So that happened. It's also not a great way to make friends with other countries if you just kind of like walk into their land and claim it as your own. But one of the things that came out of annexations were forts, and they were made to show military control of the new territories. So here's a little picture up here of some Egyptian soldiers. All right, so Senusret the First, who ruled from 1956 to 1911 BCE, and Senusret the Third from 1870 to 1831. They annexed northern part of Nubia. Um, and what both of these pharaohs did is that they built walls and forts along the second cataract of the Nile. Here's a picture of what these two pharaohs built that like you can still see this today. So hold up like a minute. A cataract? Are we talking about like the eye illness? No, we're not talking about the eye illness. But what is a cataract when I talk about that in historical terms? All right, so what cataracts are is they're areas of a river, specifically the Nile, where wider, shallower, more rapid, rocky, and islandy areas are within that river. Um, and cataracts typically aren't just like a little rapids and then, for a few hundred feet. No, they're usually really long pieces of part of the river, so they can be up to 30 miles long. And here's a picture of what the first cataract of the Nile looks like. So you can see that the water is definitely flowing and there's a lot of rocks. All right, so here's just kind of a little picture. And this shows where the second cataract is about right in here. All right, so how do historians know these walls and forts existed? Okay, besides the fact that there are still ruins that you can see today, there's these things called steles. What they are they're kind of like a stone slab that are found around the Second Cataract, giving praise to military success of the pharaohs of taking over Nubia. Here's an example of one right here. It's beautiful. And also soldiers like to draw graffiti on building materials and rocks around. Um, there's actually like a book, I don't have it, but it's about like ancient graffiti. It's really interesting. So, Egyptian soldiers were recruited among common folk, okay? So they could go like into a military career, but a lot of them were just like, hey, you want to join the military? Sure. And most of the time, these soldiers did like a one-time campaign. So they're like, oh yeah, I'll do it for a few months, and then I want to get back to my farmland. Cool, that sounds great. Here's a picture of some more Egyptian soldiers. All right. So, like I said before, Egyptian pharaohs built forts. Here is an example of one of the forts built. Now, this is an artist rendition of one. So, name two things that you observe about this artist rendition of this fort. All right. So, forts in Nubia. They weren't just like, yeah, this seems like a good place to build a fort. No, they're really strategically placed. So they're placed on the Nile and always by trading roads as well. Okay, so the benefit of being on the Nile, you get water. Also, they were always by stone quarries and mines, so they could have building materials to make these forts. Forts included huge walls, ramparts, which are like super fortified walls, ditches, bastions, which are walls at an angle, so you can like shoot arrows from many different directions. Also fortified gates with drawbridges. Inside the forts, they had barracks. Okay, so that's like where like the soldiers sleep. Workshops for craftsmen, offices for the higher ups, and of course temples for the gods. All right. So Egypt had pretty tight control over their forts, so merchants from Nubia could not pass into Egypt to sell their goods without an Egyptian fort's permission, which also led to taxes. So they could, afford these forts. The most famous fort would be the fortress of Buhin, which is what the artist rendition down here is of. So the fortress of Buhin that was built and expanded between the years of 1878 to 1843. It was mostly made by Senusret III. Here's a beautiful statue of him. After the 13th dynasty, so that's about 1700 BCE, Egypt lost the stabilization of their government, and they just could not maintain this fort anymore. Um, so they lost control of pretty much all of their foreign forts. So like this one was in Nubia, including Fortress of Buhan. All right, so here's a picture of what Fortress of Buhan looks like today. All right, so what do you think happened to the soldiers living in Fortress Buhin after Egypt lost political control of it? So, the answer may or may not surprise you, but after Egypt left the Fortress of Buhin, the soldiers were like, yo, like, the Egyptian government's not going to use this anymore. Let's turn it into our house. So the soldiers turned the barracks into their homes. They married, they had families in those homes or in like the old barracks. Um, and a fair number of the soldiers, unknown exactly how many, but they actually stayed in Nubia. They're like, why go back to Egypt? I have such a nice house here. And that would eventually lead these soldiers to becoming rivals of Egypt. Okay, because now they're in a different country. They're in a rival country. Here's a beautiful statue of a husband and wife and their kids. All right, that's the end of that. If you have questions, email me or come to office hours. Okay, so next up, we're going to talk about the New Kingdom. All right, bye.